a little over 5 years since New Zealand's magazine industry suffered what was likely the worst day it will ever have, when Bauer Media announced the immediate closure of all its titles. It happened on Zoom during the early days of the first COVID lockdown, a strange time in which magazines were literally banned from publication. Reasonable people can disagree about the extent to which that was the cause of what happened or simply a convenient excuse, but it meant that in one brief call, a host of titles suddenly ceased to be. The list is a window into popular magazine publishing history in this country. The Listener, North and South, Metro, Home, Your Home and Garden, Women's Day, New Zealand Women's Weekly, Australian Women's Weekly, Fashion Quarterly, Kia Ora, and other titles, which serviced a vast number of readers and a number of different kind of mass and niche audiences, just vanished overnight. What happened next? Some of them were bought out of retirement, like Metro, whose editor Henry Oliver spoke with my colleague Anna Rafiti-Connell a couple of weeks back, and a Listener, which is as good as it's been in years right now. I'm hoping to do a sort of sequel to this episode where I speak to the other side of this, where the magazines that were brought out of the wreckage of the Bauer shutdown. But today I'm going to talk with people who took another path, who, when their magazines were folded, started their own publications. First up, it's Rebecca Wadey and Zoe Walker-Awa, who created the digital fashion and beauty outlet Ensemble. And then next, I'm bringing on Simon Farrell-Green, who publishes Here as an architecture and design magazine in print. They're conversations which touch on the culture and commerce of magazines, how they relate to and are different from the big news shops, and how magazines, particularly independents, endure and thrive in the digital age. Rebecca, Zoe, welcome to the fold.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks for having us.
It feels like it's been a long time coming. We're I hope it's not oversharing to say that we're friends outside of this environment and talk a lot about media, but it's cool to be doing it with a hot mic.
It's a little scary to be doing it with a hot mic, but let's see what happens.
Hey, let's just feel the fear and say it anyway, I think. So actually, could you just start by kind of introducing yourselves and explaining your particular roles within Ensemble and say what Ensemble is?
I'm Zoe and I'm the editor and co-founder. So Rebecca and I both do a little bit of everything. That's just the nature of indie media right now, but I focus largely on the content editorial.
And I'm Rebecca and I do sort of the partnerships, events, commercial bits and pieces. So we started Ensemble in 2020. I've known Zoe for a really long time. We've worked together on a startup many, many years ago, and I always thought she was one of the country's greatest talents. So when she lost her job at Bauer during the infamous shutdown, I was just super excited to be able to seize the opportunity to cuddle up with her and do something really fun.
So you were on the Zoom of Doom, as it's become known. Tell me how you felt when Brendan Hill broke the news to you all, like when you're stuck at home. Magazines feel like they're falling off a cliff. This place where you built your life. It's a heavy blow.
Well, I have to be honest, I had totally forgotten his name. 5 years, like that name, I haven't heard in a long time. It was shocking. It was definitely shocking to be on that call. But if I'm honest, I kind of had felt like the end was coming. I had been at Bauer for 2 years. And I had started at Next, moved to Fashion Quarterly, and I kind of had felt like the model of magazines and circulation and really being really strict about these traditional heritage brands. It just didn't sit right with me. And I had actually written a diary of my time there, and I looked at it recently, and it literally had in it, I think the first line in it was very dramatic. It was like, a diary of my time at a industry in decline or company in decline. And so I think I knew the end was coming.
That's interesting. Was it, because I think and maybe people who freelance there but never worked there sort of romanticize Bauer a bit because, you'd go in, it's this, big place in City Works Depot, and, there's all kinds of different magazines in there. You've got the sort of current affairs titles, the sort of culture titles, and it looked like the closest thing we had in New Zealand to the kind of Condé kind of magazine stable of lore. By the sound of things, by the time you got there, underneath the hood, it wasn't feeling that way. Is that fair to say?
Yes, I think there's definitely got this fantasy of magazine world, but I feel like it was grasping onto that ideal which had ended. I mean, Condé Nast is obviously in a terrible place now, but yeah, I think it was an interesting place to work. I never really felt like I fit in there because it was very much grasping onto this ideal of like a glossy magazine editor should look a certain way and these titles should be very strict in what they're doing. And I guess when it collapsed, that's partly why it was so great for us to do Ensemble, because I just kind of felt a bit suffocated by that, like, no, you have to do this, a cover has to be that. And that kind of played into this thing of like women's lifestyle had to be a certain way, but why? I mean, it wasn't working then. And I still feel like today it's still kind of grasping at that, but we really wanted to kind of subvert all of that.
Disrupt that, yeah. Zoe wrote a really great article for Ensemble when we first launched about the challenges that she faced at Bauer and what she didn't like about the industry. And it's a really great read. I'll post that somewhere so everyone can read it. But it's really insightful, and it is sort of a look at something that is not fit for modern times.
So the kind of the gift of this of the thing melting down was the opportunity to figure out something new and to do it together. Why, and Ensemble, like it feels like it was such a crazy time. Like there was probably a lot more work in it, but it felt like it got spun up really quickly, and it had this beautiful, considered editorial look that was unlike anything else. Still is, I think. Unlike anything else in the market. No, I really mean it. It's a crazy piece of design and branding. So just talk about, given that the constraints are gone, there's new constraints, largely financial, I assume.
Yeah.
But some minor constraints.
But you're building something from scratch. So tell me about how you went about doing that and how you sort of defined its scope and how it would work.
I mean, Zoe and I both knew we wanted to do something that was very different. The Bauer titles are up for sale, and we kind of, I floated the idea of looking at one of them really briefly, and Zoe was like, ugh, who cares? And so we kind of knew from that we wanted to really do things with the reader in mind. I'd been working in beauty PR most recently before starting Ensemble. And there's that whole relationship between beauty editors and magazines and beauty companies and selling things from a place of fear and doing things with the advertiser in mind rather than the audience. And we knew very much that we wanted to do things for the reader first, and we wanted to sort of forget everything that we knew, but also do something that was digital first, not to support a print proposition, which was, I think, the first kind of fashion thing that had done that in New Zealand. And that very much was our roadmap, really.
I mean, I think, yes, we started it quickly, but I think that was the power of what I was having to go up against at Bauer. Everything was very laboured and had to have 1 million people approve it. And so the best brands come from just kind of doing it. And I think that was definitely part of the beauty of Ensemble starting. And I had also worked for Viva, which had a really strong brand. I mean, FQ had a strong brand, but we're good at brand building, I suppose, world building. So, yeah, I think that was, we both really knew we wanted something that was playful, smart, a bit cheeky and chaotic. And that was, part of it was how it was developed so fast.
So tell me about, the kind of relationship with this term lifestyle media, which... It was funny, at the Voyages a couple of weeks ago, Viva won Best Newspaper and said magazine, I think, right, very much deserved it. But there was a sense in the speech from the stage that, I'm paraphrasing here, but basically that lifestyle is great because it's a way into the sort of hard news stuff. And, a colleague of mine was like, said to me at the time, like, sounds like an apology, like it doesn't get to exist on its own terms. And part of me was like, is that almost like an institutionalization that happens?
Is there a lot of misogyny in the way people look at lifestyle media? Probably.
Well, and also there might well be, but you're next to this organization that has hard daily churning news necessarily at its heart, and you understand the kind of the commercial and the historical rationale for their proximity, but they're not necessarily easy bedfellows. Is that fair to say, in terms of when you're trying to kind of fight your corner in a bigger organisation?
Are you talking about? I mean, yes, I agree. I think having worked at the Herald and its stuff, lifestyle's never been taken seriously. I think Viva has done an amazing job at building a brand. Obviously, it's gone through its own changes recently, but it's never really been appreciated in the newsroom. So, yes, I would agree with you.
How does that sort of feel on the ground when you're in a big newsroom? Like how does that sort of sense of marginalisation or misogyny manifest itself?
I mean, it's, lifestyle is predominantly women readers, and it gets sidelined a lot in a news organisation. Obviously, when we started at Stuff, they had a driver to set up a news part of the business and a lifestyle part of the business, and they abandoned that, maybe a year into our arrival. And certainly, we've had a front row seat to a lot of the major changes in media through being at a major news organisation. And lifestyle, I think, has been more largely impacted than the more manly things like sports and other pillars like that. I think it's a huge opportunity because we know that women make the purchasing decisions in a household. It's a huge economy. It employs a lot of women, and it's a really great community of people that want to engage in that really important media, I think.
So you've made reference to Stuff, and that is the, kind of part of the ensemble story, that it began as an independent, it's now independent, but there were a few years there.
There was a few years in the middle.
Yeah, so let's talk about the start there, because I think it was about the first birthday when Sinead, who'd become the owner of Stuff about the same time you launched, bought Ensemble in, and there was this kind of logic to it as a kind of a challenger brand with a sort of refreshed identity to Viva, which was very well established at the Herald, and there wasn't really an equivalent at Stuff. What was the sort of the hopes and dreams and the vision that went in there?
I think that, as I said, they were trying to invest in lifestyle. They saw that Viva was a really great proposition for the Herald. As Zoe said, that they had a brand champion for, 20 years, like really pushing that brand and fighting for it.
And they were investing at the time. They'd launched
They'd launched the Viva Gloss during COVID, which Stuff saw as a very a great opportunity and a great pivot that they'd seized on. So,
but even that, though, I know like Amanda had to really fight for that. They worked really hard and like they got resource and support, but not as much as people might think.
Yeah.
So,
and I think that it was expected that just these two people going into the building were going to be able to change a lot
This is the pair of you going into Stuff.
Yeah, would be able to change a lot of the, not the like reader behaviour, but the business, which has been a legacy news organisation. And we weren't helped by the fact we were put into that lockdown for 6 months after a week in the building, and we didn't know our way around. So it was very much, we were up against people that didn't know how to deal with lifestyle media. Stuff are really great at dealing with mass and dealing with big numbers and communicating that on to a mass audience, communicating that to commercial partners. The whole idea of doing something a little bit like more niche was very foreign to them.
It's interesting, you talk about the commercial aspect, and I feel like if you really, drill down to it, the reason that newspapers, what were newspapers and now news sites start lifestyle verticals or lifestyle brands it's a commercial one. They then build an editorial product that that the people inside it are passionate about. But this is an economic calculus that there's this big kind of fashion and beauty and 50% of the population kind of there that they can't unlock within the kind of newspaper stack or within their kind of current news verticals. But also that it's not necessarily like that needs those dollars are real, they're available, but they need to be treated differently from Harvey Norman trying to sell
100%.
Do you feel like that was sort of understood either at the Herald or stuff in terms of how the commercial and the editorial interacted with both within the vertical and within the broader organisation?
No, I think at the Herald, yes. But again, I mean, that was obviously when I was at Viva, which was a long time ago now. I think staff didn't necessarily understand that, and that's what we fought a lot against. Like that conversation with lifestyle and commercial is a tricky one because there is this thing of, lots of added value and relationship building. Like it's relationship building, and I think when
you say added value, like you're talking about a porous wall between editorial and commercial, correct?
Yes.
They're really good at selling. They've got the largest news organisation, the largest reach in the country. They're really good at selling big numbers to people. Lifestyle isn't necessarily about meeting, 1 million people based in the South Island. It might be about having a few thousand people in Auckland who are really interested in what you want to buy, and they'll go out and buy it. Like, they're very influential. We've seen that since we left Stuff. We've still got the largest audience of any independent fashion website, and we know from sales figures that we can sell people out of things. But Stuff, they only know how to sell to a big audience, and fashion's a bit more niche than that. So
you get the news last year, which, I think in some respects is the rebirth or Ensemble returning to where it maybe should always have been in terms of how things went down as part of the bigger organisation. Well, I can imagine it being a bit triggering for you, Zoe, having it happen again.
Yes.
But, what was your sort of feeling, having struggled to kind of fight for the sort of integrity and the role of the brand within that bigger ship?
I feel like, I don't know if we were necessarily surprised. I do think, there was a lot of goodwill from both sides going into it. And we did, have a lot of support there, and it did help us grow, obviously. But I think, there was a lot of fighting and it's like, square peg, round hole kind of thing. So I don't think I was necessarily surprised. We've kind of talked about this, but I was made redundant in my role as style editor of Stuff, whatever that meant.
And it often meant doing things like writing about the Queen's best outfits and,
yes.
Things like that, which aren't necessarily her happy place, but that is what's needed for a big news organisation, doing those kind of mass
speaks
stories.
To the tension between a kind of a curated niche and a mass which just wants the biggest, clickiest thing that's vaguely adjacent to the subject.
Yes, yeah. But so I was made redundant in that, and then they said that we could take Ensemble back. Rebecca resigned, very loyal.
I was.
Why was that, Rebecca? Like what you could have stayed on and had been very successful, I think, in building. Like, I always admired the Ensemble partnerships in that, despite being part of this bigger thing, they had this sense of of curation and the way that you partnered with movies and like the way that. But
that was very much pure Ensemble, and without Ensemble in the building, that would have been not in my remit, obviously. So I'd been moved into a commercial role a year earlier when the company got rid of their life media, and that had been a tough time for me because I hadn't chosen to leave working for Ensemble. I'd been envious that Zoe had kept that in her remit. I was working with some really great people, and I was learning some good things. But also I wasn't prepared to stick around and answer commercially for why Ensemble was no longer there.
No, fair enough. And then, so you're kind of, you're in this sort of deja vu situation where you've got the brand back, and the one upside of being with Stuff, I assume, is that the sort of the bills are taken care of, and you've got to rebuild the business again as an independent. Did you find when you went back to that the goodwill that had been there, because there was it felt like a real outpouring from the sort of various worlds that Ensemble operated in, that when it started, that they wanted it to work, and that manifested a number of ways. That still feels outwardly like that's the case. How did that community respond to you saying, well, we'll take it back?
100%. The community was so thrilled for us, and the support's been incredible. So, obviously we launched a Substack soon after we went independent again, and the support on there has been great. We've had commercial brands that have continued to work with us. We've worked with Stuff on a couple of partnerships, and that's been really good. Obviously there's been some really good things and continue to be really good things out of our relationship with them. But I think Substack's been great, and just being able to have that direct line with our audience more again has been phenomenal.
Why did you pick Substack when, as a kind of a statement of this is going to be the new Ensemble?
Well, we needed a way to monetize, and we just don't have the resource to put a paywall on the website. And I love Substack. I get a lot of them.
They've gone really hard into fashion.
Yes. Overseas.
Yeah,
yes.
Overseas, not so much locally.
Yeah.
And it's kind of hard to tell, have they gone hard into fashion, or has fashion gone hard into them? It feels like it's a bit of both.
Yes.
But it did feel like you were pushing on an open door doing fashion in the Substack world.
Yes.
Ensemble was in one of the top 20 growing fashion Substacks for a while.
That's congratulations.
I know, it was very exciting. We were on the charts.
But I think it's hard to build an audience. And I think going into it, we already had a subscriber base, which was really helpful. And, it let us monetize that subscriber base. And the response from people wanting to pay and to support us has been really, it's been really nice. It's like a reminder of what we're doing is people resonate with it, which I think maybe it's stuff we kind of forgot that a little bit. I did.
We launched because we wanted to be a personality-led brand, and we wanted a direct line with our readers, and being able to sort of return to that and know that we still have that connection with them is really great. Last night we had a very, very cute subscriber Substack chat about the Lord.
The toilet pop-up.
The toilet pop-up, and it was going off all night cute. Through to 6 a.m. with live updates, and it was so fun.
And that's the kind of thing that you can just, not effortlessly, because there is effort involved, but it's not.
You can try things. It's not so visible and public and weird that you have to spend a lot of money and time thinking about stuff.
And the same kind of person who would be very comfortable just having a gossip about. And I don't mean that in a negative way. I feel like that's
no, we love gossip.
Yeah.
Gossip is our middle name.
About an event like that within the confines of a Substack exchange would definitely not be the same, feel the same if they were on Stuff. It's just a different mentality.
It's messier.
Yeah.
And that's what I like about Substack. It reminds me of early blogger days. I had a blog in the 2010s, I don't know. And it's you could just do it. You don't have to overthink it. And I think that's what Ensemble has always been. We do events and we try this, and that's what makes us special.
It is another platform, and it's another hungry beast that needs to be fed. And that's really hard when there's just two of you and you've got a website and an Instagram and everything else. But it is a platform that allows you to monetize, which is amazing. And it's also a platform that rewards writers over imagery, which I find super interesting and I love. So
let's talk about the sort of the other aspect of the business. That's the audience revenue stream. In terms of the sort of partnerships and the relationships with various aspects of industry, how's that going? And for example, I love the screenings you do at the Hollywood. There's just that a sense of being able to bring a group of people into a room, or activations in stores. Like there are things that a print magazine can't do, but a magazine brand in a digital space can show up in the real world that feels like where a lot of the power in a commercial way lies now.
Yeah, and I think, Ensemble as a brand, it's so much more than like a website or a Substack or an Instagram account. It's everything, and events form a big part of our brand. We love the opportunity to connect with people, and we've both worked for companies before where events had to be signed off by like 400 people and have a certain budget of a high caliber and be like super shiny and perfect. So we are big fans of just kind of closing our eyes and going, eek, let's just jump in head first and sort of just making shit happen. And it kind of works.
And we have also had some amazing, like with the events we've done this year, we've had a really amazing support from like Emma Lewisham, Untouched World, like local brands that can see that we're reaching that community of people.
And probably feel a kinship with what you're doing that they might not have felt with a larger media organisation that has layers of approval and a particular way that they go about things. Lastly, as we record this, you're a few hours away from another kind of event, which again feels like extremely Ensemble, not necessarily messy, but has the potential to be. Tell me what's happening tonight. It'll be in the past by the time we release, but it does.
It was amazing. We're doing. We're keen to do a series of supper clubs. We know that Hospo is really suffering hard at the moment, and there's some really amazing hospitality people out there wanting foots indoors. We also know that people crave community and conversation. So tonight's our first Ensemble supper club upstairs at Sam Ray in Ponsonby Road. And we've got special guest Morgana O'Reilly from The White Lotus. And I cannot wait to ask her about the news this morning. Breaking news that Mike White is on Survivor season 50. You heard it here first.
But this in 2 weeks' time, you've probably heard it here last. But
it's a very niche person that appreciates that. That's me. So it's get together, food, wine, conversation. Zoe and I will kind of chat with Morgana. Guests can interject and ask her questions. Lots of people have bought tickets on their own, which I think is awesome. It shows that we're a safe space. We'll eat local food and drink local wine and have a ball, hopefully.
Well, it's really cool. I obviously know both of you. Zoe and I went to journalism school some censored years ago. But loved the arrival of Ensemble in the scene and really think that it's got a voice like no one else. So really cool to see you kind of persevering through the nuclear media winter. And
I mean, you've been such a great supporter of us from the very beginning. I know that when we first started Ensemble, I was living in the Coromandel and I drove back and had you were one of the first people that we chatted to about what our plans were, and you've been a great support ever since. So thank you very much, Duncan.
Oh, I didn't want that, but that's very kind of you to say.
You can cut that if it makes them uncomfortable.
Cool. Thanks both. Good luck with tonight and with everything going forward. And like the
Ngā mihi nui.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Morena, Simon, welcome to the fold.
Thank you. Nice to be here.
I wonder if you could start by telling me where you are and what you're up to. We're on a video call despite the hair office being very close to the spin-offs, and there's a very expensive looking couch behind you.
It is a very nice couch. I don't know what brand it is. I am in Melbourne, which is only my second trip overseas in 6 years, which feels quite novel. And I've been here all week. I sort of came over for the Dulux Colour Awards, but I've got some clients here to see as well and some architect mates to catch up with, and I've been doing a bit of research for an upcoming kind of travel special thing that we're going to do. So it all just sort of merged into one trip, which was handy.
This feels very much like a kind of a classic window into magazines in 2025 where the print product is very important and foundational, but all the other stuff you do around it, including having to see clients and so on, is even for the editor, as crucial a part as the print product at the end of it.
Yeah, it's a phrase that we've started talking about, which I can't think of a better word. It's not the best word, but we've sort of started talking about this kind of ecosystem, and it's threaded through by the brand. So yeah, the print product is incredibly important, both editorially and commercially in terms of revenue, but also in terms of that is the place that we really define the design values of the brand. And that's one of the loveliest things about magazines is still that intent of design, the care, the time that you take. You can do it a bit on digital, and you can do it a bit in social and some of those sorts of ways, but that sort of 128 pages every 2 months of perfectly designed product is still the core. But then we kind of try and make it exist in multiple different places and events and EDMs and everything. We just kind of push it out everywhere.
So and that is the kind of playbook of the modern magazine, and I don't think you can really survive, let alone thrive in this era without embracing the sort of multi-layered ecosystemic aspect to it, which hasn't always been the case. Do you want to just start by telling me a bit about your sort of history with and relationship to magazines?
Yeah, the really long history is that I'm a third generation journalist. So my mum was a magazine editor and a long-time mag journo in the 90s and in the 70s. She sort of had a break when I was little. And so I've always been around magazines and that process. And she worked for Metro when I was a teenager. So that was pretty intoxicating. And that was, the days of Metro having 11 staff writers and 3 art directors and all that sort of stuff. And then actually, I didn't know her, but Mum's aunt was the first woman journalist at the New Zealand Herald, the first or the second, I can't remember which. During World War II, she had been working in the library and they promoted her up to news when all the men went to war. So there's kind of a long history there of journalism for us. And then I came into Metro straight out of journalism school and sifted around there for 5 years. I came back from London I worked for Esquire in London, which was amazing. And then came back from London in the GFC. So I got made redundant in London and there was nowhere else to go. So I came back to New Zealand and freelanced for a really long time, like 6 or 7 years. And then I managed to land back at what was then Bauer Media as the editor of Home, which was a bit of a dream come true and kind of a bit of a long shot to have even got it, to be honest. They definitely took a punt because I had 0 actual editing experience, but it was a great gig.
Yeah, let's talk about Home because it's obviously what you learned there would have massively informed what you did with here, and it was also, as it turned out, the final years of Bauer, the company which had been ACP, this great stable of print magazines in New Zealand, and you were, when you took it over, you were taking over from Jeremy Hansen, who'd had a pretty stunning 10-year run building it in the kind of form that we know it. Tell me about what Bauer was like in that period, and why Home was such a dream for you.
It was Jeremy had taken over. That's the title goes back in various sort of. There's been various mergers and name changes and kind of amalgamations of multiple titles since 1936. But the kind of modern incarnation of it really started with Deborah Miller in the 90s, who really revolutionized it into quite a serious consumer architecture magazine, if you like. So talking about architecture and design in quite not serious tones, but more than cushions and kind of the sort of more sort of home at personality-driven stuff. And then Claire McCall had edited it, and then Jeremy really sort of took it over, and he worked with Arch McDonnell at In-House, and that was the first magazine for a long time that had been taken over by like a design agency and completely, so it became quite celebrated as a piece of design as much as the content that was going in it. So, and I'd been helping Jeremy on and off when he needed extra hands around, so I was sort of familiar with what was going on. But it was a really interesting time. I mean, I was only the editor in the end for 3.5 years, which is quite funny because I've now been doing this for 5. It was in hindsight really obvious that things were getting really tight, and that the model was kind of starting to break. But I don't think any of us were particularly conscious of that at the time. And I think so. There was a lot of fun. I was really proud of the magazine that we made. I loved all the people that we worked with, and I was extremely happy with everything. And I guess around that sort of time that Bauer wound up, I had started to feel like I understood what we could do and where we would need to go in order to keep the title current. I think that was the major thing I struggled with, certainly in the sort of first year, was taking over this thing that had this whole heritage and legacy, and trying to understand how to start to turn that ship around. And I started to have some thoughts on that, on how we could sort of set it up for another 5 or 10 years. But yeah, in hindsight, things were getting really, really scratchy around the edges, both in terms of kind of revenue, the kind of digital disruption, and also just, I mean, Bauer was huge and very siloed. So it seems bizarre to me now that we had a whole separate digital team from my team that sat in a different part of the building and didn't really talk to each other. Like, and you'd have to have a meeting about the social schedule and that. Like it was, and then the ad team were upstairs, and that was a whole separate thing as well. So I think probably some quite major structural issues in hindsight that maybe would have needed to be addressed, but didn't end up happening that way.
So the end gets announced on that sort of infamous
Zoom of Doom.
Zoom of Doom. What was your reaction, and how quickly did you move into the idea of your response being to make something new from scratch? Like, did you ever consider trying to buy the title out of the wreckage, or was it always actually there's an opportunity here?
I was immediately, like within minutes, determined that I would do something. It was when you run titles inside those big organisations, it's like any corporate. You run your own P&L. So I knew what the kind of, even despite the challenges and the headwinds and all that, I knew there was a really good, strong business model there. I knew that, in particular, architecture was slightly insulated, and still is, from some of the challenges that have hit maybe other categories of magazine because of the very particular nature of the commercial stuff, which is you can't really represent beautiful buildings. It's very difficult to do
on a small black rectangle.
Exactly, yeah. So there's that from an editorial point of view. There's also that sort of beautiful design object thing that gets people as excited as they do about the actual content, is the fonts and the layouts and all that sort of stuff. And then also there's a really interesting commercial model to it in terms of the advertisers, by and large, don't need to sell a lot of the thing that they're selling, having seen it in your magazine, in order to recoup the cost of their investment in your magazine. So I always kind of talk about food titles. Griffin's has to sell a lot of biscuits to justify a brand ad, but a building company or a furniture brand doesn't have to sell 10,000 very nice sofas to justify their investment with you. So I knew that there was a business there. And then it was just a question of how we were going to do it. I was vaguely involved with the sales process, and that was became quickly obvious that they weren't interested in just selling one magazine to one editor. And so we kind of decided pretty fast that there was an opportunity to start a new one. And the more I thought about that, the more appealing the idea of kind of dumping this legacy of inherited ideas and just starting from a completely blank sheet of paper on every single level was actually really appealing. It just felt like a clean start and a way of really going, how does this work now? What does this need to be? Who does this need to talk to? And just leave all of those. When you've got a title that's been around for 80 years, everyone's got an opinion on what you should be. And 5 years in, people still don't come up to me and tell me what I should do with my magazine, which is a really lovely thing. They'll be enthusiastic and they'll have ideas, but there isn't that kind of sense of almost ownership that people have in legacy titles. So yeah, it was. And the short answer to your question is it was immediate. It was straight away. There was never any question in my head that we would do something.
So I just want to take a quick detour here because I am weirdly nostalgic for the kind of early sort of bloggy, independent digital New Zealand media scene, the likes of the Panagraph Punch and Eat Here Now, which was a publication that you founded, both of which I think predate the spin-off, even though we sort of feel some kind of kinship with them. I just wondered if you could talk about that and how it sort of informed or gave you confidence to build a new thing, having kind of figured that out.
Did we predate the spin-off?
I think so. So, maybe by a year or two.
You just worked out how to turn it into a business. So I'd sort of come back from London. I'd freelanced for all sorts of different people over there, and I'd got this gig at Esquire, which was amazing. And then I came back to Auckland in 2009. And actually, I was talking about this last night, that period of post-GFC where it felt like the whiplash coming out of recession was really fast. And it was driven in Auckland in part by this big group of sort of late 20s, early 30s-something people who'd been kicked out of big cities by the GFC. And there was that sort of explosion, and there was the World Cup coming, and there was do you remember there was CityWorks Depot suddenly opened, and the art gallery opened, and Britomart was taking off, and it was like, we've got this the start of a city here.
The seeds of a proper city.
This isn't I'm feeling a bit sad about it at the moment because I feel like actually the things are broken a bit at the moment, but I'm sure post railway tunnel it'll kick off again.
We're pinning everything on that tunnel, but I kind of believe it.
And so it was this sense of, there's heaps of cool stuff opening. And I'd been away for a while, a couple of years, and I was not very au fait with the eating scene. And I just couldn't go online and search for fine dining restaurant in central Auckland or, just there was nothing that was kind of a registry of really utilitarian reviews. There were sort of these long, sort of quite personal, the old school. I took my wife and she wore her favourite dress and she had the Chardonnay and said it was delicious, and we went out and we had our friends and that crap. And and there was kind of lots of Google stuff, like sort of early era reviews that were kind of quite user generated, but there was kind of nothing that was like, here's 200 words on why you should go here and the things that you should order and go here now. And so me and Natalie Smith, who's a really old friend of mine, sort of batted this around for a while. And in the end, we just kind of bought a URL and downloaded a WordPress template and kind of hacked it up. And then I talked to a photographer friend of mine and was like, I kind of need to get some restaurants photographed. And he was like, that was Todd Ayer, who's a really great photographer. And he was like, look, I'm too busy and you can't afford me, but I've got this assistant who has worked for Magnum in New York and he's a really nice guy, so you guys should chat. And so that was David Straight, who is now one of our major architectural photographers. And David came and met us, and he was like, "Yeah, I don't shoot food."
Could be an issue.
And we were like, "Okay, that seems okay." And so he went off and started shooting restaurants. And we sort of had this idea that we would treat fine dining and cheap eats exactly the same. So we'd give them the same number of photos, the same kind of length of copy. Yeah, and it was heaps of fun. I just couldn't make any money out of it. I didn't know how.
I mean, it's kind of one of the tragedies of hospitality. It seems like every piece of it is it's like both beloved and a really incredibly difficult business through. But it must have been, even though the sort of business side of it was frustrating, the actual here's how you make something and that it can be done from scratch when you come to make here. Just knowing that you'd done it before must have been some kind of at least, this is not impossible.
I'd never connected those two. I think, I think that idea that you could just magic something up and do it on a pretty kind of gut feel base, like, I think we should just make it like this.
And there's a lot of goodwill, I think, when you're starting something, and especially with the moment that you started here with that sort of vacuum that it was stepping into.
Yeah.
Do you want to just talk a bit about, give us a top-line scope for it, because we've been talking around it a lot. And
sorry.
No, that's on me. And also talk about the community it serves, as you would describe it, both sort of commercially and from an audience perspective.
Yeah, I mean, it's a really nice three-legged stool. So from an audience point of view, you've got a really clear mix of specifiers and architects, so interior designers and architects. So in some ways, it's kind of got some elements of almost like a trade magazine to it. So there's a lot of professional interest, which gives you real connection, and there's a real thirst for stuff there. And then you've got this audience of homeowners who are not necessarily looking for ideas. A lot of the time what they're looking for is the language, so that they might be thinking about building or renovating or whatever, and they're going to use an architect, and this is all really new to them. And so they're almost just kind of giving themselves a little education in that. So there's that. And then there's the advertisers who kind of want to talk to both. And they like both sides of that audience for different reasons. So the fact that we bring them together and sort of talk to them in the same intelligent way is really nice. But I guess the sort of top line thing of it was we wanted to sort of play with this idea of luxury and humility and design. So what is important? And I'm really resistant to kind of pointless, shiny, expensive things just for the sake of it. But I also was really resistant to the idea that we were just making an accessible magazine. I've always been really interested, both with the Here Now and with Here, in what happens when you kind of put those two things side by side and say both of these things sort of exist for the same reason, but they do it in different ways. Both are really cool. And what happens when you put a $5 million, new build in Freeman's Bay next to a $500,000 house on a backlot in Christchurch, and what are the connections between those two things? And it comes down to design and intent and space, and there's a kind of optimism to it all of making things better. So that's always been our kind of really guiding North Star is just that balance between the two, and wanting to make something that had a real sense of heart, that felt really personal, and really, I think that was the other thing that I really wanted to get right away from, was this sort of cold, impersonal, trend-driven kind of architecture mag, and get into something that felt like it was quite gutsy and had a bit of soul and heart and some authenticity and integrity. Those are sort of some of the words that we've always kind of played with and pulled back to whenever we start to think about what we're meant to be doing. Those are sort of the words we use. And then that was sort of where we started.
So whenever you've got a any magazine is a series of decisions, and it's as much about the things that you say no to as the things that you let in, and equally it's about appraising, especially a magazine like here, different aspects of the world that you're exploring. Henry Oliver, editor of Metro, and Anna Rafferty-Connell, who guest hosted a few Fold episodes for me recently, they talked about this sort of tension, which I felt, as a sort of a lapsed critic myself, have felt about the sort of smallness of New Zealand and the necessity of good critical writing about different sort of domains, but also the fact that if you're in any way interested in it, you end up kind of knowing everyone involved in it. And I can imagine that the smallness of the world and the height of the stakes within architecture and interiors and so on might be, make arts look like small fry. How do you sort of manage the fact of being a picker and a curator, while also interacting with a world of which you're very much a part?
Yeah, I mean, the first thing is we're not critics, so I'm really clear on that. We're not kind of running. There's no negative chat in the magazine. It's always the I guess the criticism.
So the picking is
the picking is the criticism.
Yes.
Yeah. The picking's the criticism, and what you leave on the floor is probably the negative stuff. It's always a bit tricky. I mean, I think because here has always been so singular, I don't actually get a lot across my desk that isn't worth thinking about. It's very rare that you get one that you just go, I don't know why they sent this to me. This makes, like, I don't see this any connection at all to what we're doing here. And I think because we've always been so particular and singular about that people that's never been in any doubt in other people's heads. And then from there, it's kind of this sort of a series of questions of, have I seen this before? Does this make me feel really excited? Does this have a great story to it? What are we actually going to talk about when we write the story that doesn't feel like something we've already done? So we're kind of looking for that freshness and that newness and an edge that maybe we haven't had before, rather than I often sort of say to the architects when they say, what should I send you? And I'm like, the one that got you really excited, not the third version of that idea that you'd had 5 years ago that the clients have come and said, we really liked that, could you tweak it? And they don't just tweak a design, but there is kind of language of design and ideas that circulate through projects. And I always say the one that kind of moved the dial is the one that we want to see. And then from there, it's just kind of being really open and honest and saying, oh, look, we've got a really full book and this doesn't quite work for us. Love to see whatever you've got coming down the pipe. But feel free, I think you'll definitely find a house for, a home for this somewhere else. Cheers. So it's quite, I try to be quite honest about it, but quite sort of respectful and gentle, I guess.
So you're persistently using the phrase "we."
Yes.
So
the royal we.
Yeah, well, it's a royal we, but it's a family business.
Yeah.
So to talk about that and about what doing this as it being the sort of family's life and livelihood does.
Yeah.
And especially when set against something, I mean, Bauer's a family business too, but quite a different scale, right?
Different scale of family. Yeah. It is a family business. So, I mean, I guess the only full-time employees are me and my wife, Hannah. So we run the brand in a way. And Han was always around in the background early on, and then about a year in, it became really obvious that I wasn't kind of capable of running the whole thing on my own, and there were certain things I wasn't doing. So she quit her job and came and worked with me, which felt like a real kind of leap of faith, but it's given us a real purpose around, we get up in the morning to make this thing go so that we can feed and house our kids, which is really, really special. And I think it does give the magazine or the brand a lot of heart, because people know that it's a family business, which we're pretty open about. And then there's a bunch of really important freelancers. So Sarah Gladwell's our design director. She's been with us since the start. She's designed every millimetre of the magazine. Every piece of design we've put out into the world has had her fingerprints on it. And that's been a really important relationship in terms of just pushing things or passing things to her and saying, I don't know, what should this be? And just having stuff come back that is amazing and that you never would have done. And then we've got Harriet Cowie, who's our writer in the South Island, Alex Scott, who's our copy editor, and we've got another part-time contractor sort of helping us on the commercial side, Karis Palmer. So it's not a small team, but it's not a full-time team. And I'm really increasingly trying to not be the kind of center point of it all, because I create backlogs. So people sort of get a bit funny when I talk about we, because it's always been identified with me, but it's not.
And you said when we in correspondence that's intentional, and you plan to keep it that way. I think next month, as we record this, it's 5 years, as you say, far out paced your time with Home. Tell me about where it sits now. What a year of here kind of is made up of, and where you see it going.
Yeah, it's I don't think anybody. It's no secret that the kind of media business is really hard at the moment. So we are working incredibly hard on just keeping the thing going, and most of our revenue is from advertising. So that takes up a lot of time. I guess we've got the sort of, there's a nice rhythm to the year of the 6 issues a year. We've got an awards program that comes out in October, so that sort of starts up about now and runs through to October. And we've started building, as we've gone, we've just built out little extra bits. So we've got this quite nerdy building guide that comes out in the August issue, which is a total counterpoint to what we usually do. It's all very practical and buildery. And then we've got a travel guide that we do in December. So it's kind of, I think the project at the moment is fleshing out around the edges of what we would do typically, which is this very two-geared standard magazine of the features, which are the houses, and then this here and now section, which is the kind of news, more newsy bit. And just kind of adding little bits to that as we go, and just trying to sort of round out the whole project, really.
Well, congratulations on building it, and
thank you.
And really, that was such a, I don't know, for some reason that moment, the Zoom of Doom, I wasn't even on it, but it just felt like such a sharp intake of breath for this world that both of us come from in magazines. And so to have seen you kind of determinedly build and sustain something out of it is a really beautiful response to the challenge at that moment. And yeah,
thanks.
Excited to see where it goes.
Yeah, thank you. It's really nice to chat.
Mm-hmm.